The invitation, the morning was quiet. Soft light slipped through the curtains of the small house, touching the floor like golden threads. The world outside seemed peaceful. The birds sang gently, the leaves outside swayed, and a clock ticked in steady rhythm. Inside, the air was warm and calm, the kind of stillness that feels like safety. He had grown up around this place almost as if it was his second home. His mother's best friend lived here, and to him she had always been someone steady, someone who made him feel welcome. She was the woman who smiled kindly when he visited, who poured tea in the kitchen, who asked about his studies and listened in a way that made him feel important. That morning, the house smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet, maybe fresh bread or warm milk. He moved through the hallway slowly, hearing the floorboards creak under his steps. He was used to this sound, used to this house, but something about today felt different. It was quiet, too quiet, almost as if the air carried a secret waiting to be spoken. And then, from behind a half-closed door, her voice called out, "Come in, please." The words were simple, spoken softly, but they carried a weight he didn't expect. He stopped for a moment, standing there, feeling his breath catch. The door was slightly open, letting out a faint glow of light. He could see the edge of her curtain swaying with the breeze. The room beyond looked ordinary, but the sound of her voice lingered in his chest. He pushed the door gently, careful not to make too much noise, as though he was entering a sacred place. Inside, the room felt warm, filled with light from the morning sun. The curtains glowed a pale gold and dust motes floated in the air like tiny stars. On the side table, a cup rested, steam curling upward. The scent of her perfume, soft, floral, familiar, drifted through the room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, the morning light painting her face in soft lines. She looked up at him and smiled, the kind of smile that was gentle but held something deeper behind it. "You came," she said, as if she had been waiting. He nodded, unsure why his throat felt tight, why the simple act of stepping into her room made his heart beat louder. He had been here before many times, but it had never felt like this. There was a comfort in her presence, but now it carried something else, a quiet tension, a question unspoken. He looked around the room, noticing small details. The neatly folded blanket at the end of the bed, the soft ticking of a clock on the wall, the faint rustle of the curtains. Ordinary things, yet today they seemed charged, like every detail was holding meaning. She patted the chair near her bed and he moved toward it, his steps slow, his hands brushing against his pockets as if searching for steadiness. "Sit," she said softly. He did. The chair creaked lightly under him. He could feel her eyes on him, and when he glanced at her, her gaze did not move away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence filled the room, not empty but alive, thick with something he could not name. He wanted to say something simple, something ordinary. Ask about her morning, ask if she was feeling well. But the words stayed locked in his chest. She broke the silence first. "You're quiet today." Her voice was soft, almost playful, but there was a warmth in it that touched him deeper than before. I didn't expect you to call me," he answered honestly, his voice low. Her lips curved into a small smile. "Sometimes I just like company, and you always bring a calm with you." He felt his chest tighten again, the way it did when someone spoke words that went straight to the heart. There was nothing dramatic in her tone, nothing direct, but the way she said it lingered. He watched her lift the cup of tea from the table and take a slow sip, her movements unhurried. The small sound of porcelain against her lips, the soft exhale as she set it down. It was all ordinary, but to him it felt like more. The light shifted in the room as the sun rose higher, the glow touching her hair, making it shine. He had always seen her as someone close to his family, someone safe. But now, sitting here, he felt something else stirring. The warmth of her smile, the softness in her voice, the closeness of the moment. It blurred the lines of who she was supposed to be. He realized then that the invitation had not been about tea or a casual talk. It was something quieter, deeper. She had asked him into her space, into her world, in a way that felt personal, intimate, and he had said yes, without thinking, without even asking why. The clock ticked again. The curtains swayed. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his with a steady, unflinching look. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. He swallowed, his heart racing, and though he didn't know where this moment would lead, He knew one thing clearly. The simple act of stepping into that room had changed something between them. It was no longer just a visit. It was the beginning of a story neither of them had spoken out loud, crossing the threshold. The door had closed behind him with the softest sound, but it felt louder in his ears as though the whole house had heard it. Inside her room, he became suddenly aware of the distance between them and how easily it could change. He stood for a moment, his hand brushing against the wooden frame of the chair she had offered earlier. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of her perfume mixed with morning tea. The small lamp on the table still glowed even though daylight filled the room, giving everything a gentle softness. He had crossed this threshold many times before, helping with small chores, bringing messages from his mother, sharing tea at her table, but today everything felt unfamiliar. Ordinary details were transformed. The soft rug under his feet, the quiet hum of the old ceiling fan, even the pattern on her curtain, they all seemed to hold him in place. She watched him quietly, her head tilted slightly, her lips curved in a smile that was neither teasing nor distant. It was the kind of look that unsettled him, not because it was sharp, but because it was too gentle, too steady. "You seem nervous," she said, her voice low, carrying a touch of warmth that almost disguised the question inside it. He shook his head, though his heart betrayed him, beating louder, filling his ears with its rhythm. "No, it feels different here today." Her smile deepened and she leaned back slightly against the bed. "Different can be good." The words stayed in the air, hanging there between them. He didn't know what to answer, so he let silence do the work. The silence itself wasn't empty. It carried the sound of the ticking clock, the faint whistle of the wind outside, and the shared awareness that neither of them looked away. He took the chair again, lowering himself onto it carefully. The wooden legs scraped lightly against the floor, breaking the quiet for just a moment before stillness returned. He folded his hands together, unsure what to do with them, and let his eyes drift toward the sunlight spilling across her floor. She shifted slightly on the bed, the fabric of her dress whispering as she moved. That small sound drew his eyes back to her, though he wished he had resisted. She was close, so close that he could see the way the light touched the curve of her cheek, the softness in her hair, the calm strength in her eyes. Her hand reached for the cup again, lifting it with grace, fingers delicate against porcelain. She took a sip, set it back down, and then spoke. "You've grown up so quickly," she said, her tone almost thoughtful, almost wistful. "It feels like yesterday you were just a boy running through this house." He gave a small laugh, more to break the intensity than because he found it funny. "And now I'm here, sitting in your room like this." Her gaze didn't move away. "Yes," she whispered. "Now you're here." The way she said it made his chest tighten again. It was not just a comment, it was a recognition. A confession wrapped in simple words. He shifted in his chair, leaning back slightly as though space might help him breathe. But it didn't. The air still carried her presence, her closeness. He wanted to speak, to say something that would explain what he felt, but the right words refused to come. She leaned forward a little, resting her elbows on her knees, her face closer now. "Do you know why I asked you to come?" The question struck him. He swallowed hard, searching for an answer he did not have. I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice softer than he intended. Her eyes held his for a long moment as though she was measuring his honesty. Then she smiled again. A softer smile this time, touched with something that felt like longing. "Because sometimes," she said slowly, "we need someone who sees us. Not as a friend, not as a mother, not as anything, but who we are in this moment." Her words were careful, but they carried weight. He felt them in his chest, heavy and light all at once. He realized she wasn't just speaking to him. She was letting him into a part of herself she didn't show others. He nodded slowly, not breaking eye contact. "I see you." The words escaped before he had time to shape them. But once spoken, they felt true. Her breath caught faintly, just for a moment, and then she sat back again, as though the moment had shifted too quickly. The silence returned, but it was different now, denser, filled with what had been said and what had not. The clock ticked on. Outside, a car passed distantly, but inside the room, time felt slower, almost suspended. He realized then that crossing her threshold had not been just about stepping into her room. It was about stepping into her world, into her vulnerability, into a closeness that was more powerful than anything he had known. And as he sat there, hearing the soft sounds of her breath and the quiet hum of the house around them, he knew one truth. There was no going back to how things had been before. The threshold was behind him. The only path was forward into whatever this moment was becoming, the room's atmosphere. The room was ordinary. It had the same wooden furniture, the same pale curtains, the same neat arrangement it always had. But for him, nothing about it felt ordinary now. It was as if every object carried meaning, every small detail pulling him deeper into something unspoken. The light from the window fell across the bed in soft stripes, turning the sheets into waves of gold and shadow. The curtain swayed gently with the breeze, brushing against the window frame with a sound so faint it felt like a sigh. A small clock ticked on the wall, each second steady, unhurried, almost reminding him that time was still moving, even if he felt caught in a moment that stretched endlessly. He sat quietly in the chair, his eyes wandering. There was a framed photograph on the side table, her and his mother smiling, younger, standing together at some family gathering. He had seen it before, but now the image struck him. It reminded him of how close their lives had always been, how natural it felt to be here, yet how strange it felt now. She noticed his eyes pause on the picture. "We've shared many years together, your mother and I," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth, but underneath it was something more, a quiet sadness he hadn't heard before. He turned his gaze back to her, surprised by the shift in her tone. "You've always been close," he said gently. "Yes," she answered, nodding slowly. "But sometimes closeness can make you invisible." The words lingered in the air, soft but heavy. He didn't fully understand them, yet he felt the weight in her voice, the way her eyes drifted toward the light. The room seemed to echo her words. The hum of the fan above carried a steady rhythm, but every small sound, the brush of fabric, the clink of porcelain when she moved her cup, felt louder, sharper, almost alive. The space between them was filled not only with silence but with something pressing against it. Unspoken feelings, half-formed thoughts, the warmth of something that shouldn't be but was. He leaned back in his chair slightly, letting his eyes wander again, not out of disinterest but because looking directly at her for too long felt overwhelming. The books on her shelf, the folded blanket at the edge of the bed, even the slippers placed neatly near the dresser, they all seemed to belong to a life of calm order. And yet here he was, breaking that calm by simply being present in this way. She shifted on the bed, pulling her hair over one shoulder. The small movement caught his eyes again. She smiled faintly, almost as if she knew he couldn't help but notice. "Do you like this room?" she asked suddenly, her tone light, almost playful. He blinked at the question, caught off guard. "It feels peaceful," he said after a moment. Her smile deepened. "Peaceful can be lonely, too." Again, her words carried double meaning, and again he felt his chest tighten. He wanted to respond, to say something that matched the honesty of her tone, but instead he let the silence hold them both. The breeze pushed the curtain again, making the light flicker across the floor. The shifting sunlight made the room feel alive, as if it was breathing with them. Every now and then he heard the faint creak of the house settling, as though the walls themselves were listening. He realized then that the atmosphere was not only in the room, it was in him. His senses were sharper, every detail magnified. The way her perfume lingered in the air, the warmth of her presence, the slight tremble in his own breath. It was as if the room itself had become a mirror of what he was feeling. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees. "You're very quiet," she said again, her eyes steady on him. He swallowed, his voice low when he finally spoke. "It's hard to find the right words here." Her expression softened. "Sometimes words are not needed." That reply silenced him even more because it was true. The silence between them was not empty. It was alive, charged, and somehow more honest than anything they could say. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The clock ticked, the fan hummed, the breeze whispered, and in that ordinary setting, everything felt extraordinary. He thought of how strange it was, to be in a room so familiar yet to feel as though he had stepped into a new world. The same furniture, the same curtains, the same woman he had known for years, and yet nothing was the same, and she knew it too. He could see it in the way her eyes lingered, the way her voice lowered, the way she didn't look away. She had invited him into her room, but more than that, She had invited him into a part of herself that was hidden behind everyday life. The room's atmosphere was not just about light, sound, or scent. It was about what hung between them. Longing, comfort, a tenderness too close to name. He sat there, breathing slowly, realizing that he didn't want to leave. That the room, with its warmth and stillness, had become something he would carry with him forever. Playful exchange. The silence had stretched so long that even the soft ticking of the clock began to feel like part of their conversation. Then, as if sensing the heaviness, she let out a small laugh, light, almost musical. It broke the stillness, softening the air in an instant. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," she teased, her eyes glinting with quiet amusement. He smiled awkwardly, shifting in his chair. "I didn't know sitting in a room could feel so serious." Her laugh came again, warmer this time. "Serious?" she repeated. "Oh, don't tell me I make you nervous." Her tone was playful, but her eyes lingered on him in a way that carried more than just humor. He swallowed, feeling his throat tighten, unsure whether to deny it or let the truth slip. "Maybe a little," he admitted finally. His voice low, almost shy. She leaned back against the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Good," she said with a mischievous smile. "It means I still have an effect." He tilted his head. "On who?" Her smile deepened, and for a moment she didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the cup on her bedside table and lifted it with careful grace. She took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his, as though the question didn't need an answer. The quiet challenge in her gaze made his heart race. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You enjoy this, don't you?" "Making me guess what you mean." She set the cup down gently, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "Guessing is half the fun," she said. Her words carried a double edge, playful on the surface but tinged with something heavier. He felt it, though he wasn't sure how to name it. The breeze lifted the curtain again, sending stripes of sunlight dancing across the room. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, watching her with cautious boldness. "And what happens if I guess right?" Her eyebrows rose and she gave a soft, amused hum. "Then," she said slowly, "maybe I'll tell you the rest." He chuckled, though his chest felt tight. "That sounds dangerous." Her smile widened, her eyes gleaming with unspoken thought. "Some things are worth a little danger." Their voices softened, lowered almost to whispers, as if the room itself demanded intimacy. The exchange carried a rhythm of its own. Question, answer, pause, silence, then another playful line to draw them closer. "Do you always talk like this?" he asked, his tone light but his meaning clear. "Only when someone listens closely," she replied. The answer hit him deeper than he expected. He let out a slow breath, glancing toward the floor before meeting her gaze again. "I'm listening," he said. Her eyes softened then, her teasing expression folding into something gentler, more vulnerable. "I know," she whispered. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was charged, alive with the memory of their words. It felt like standing at the edge of something, both of them waiting to see who would move first. To ease the intensity, he leaned back with a small grin. "You know, if my mother knew I was sitting here being interrogated like this, she'd say I should charge you for it." That made her laugh again, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room and eased the tightness in his chest. "Oh, really?" she teased. "Then I suppose I owe you something." His smile faltered for a moment at the weight behind her words. "I wasn't serious," he said quickly, though his tone carried more hope than denial. "Neither was I," she answered smoothly, her eyes still sparkling. But the pause after her words suggested there was more truth hiding beneath the playfulness. The breeze whispered again, the curtain swaying gently, as though even the air had joined in their exchange. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and in that gaze was more said than either dared to speak aloud. Finally, she broke the moment with another teasing remark. "You know, you've grown sharper with your words. A little dangerous yourself?" He grinned faintly, the tension easing into a kind of fragile comfort. "I learned from the best." Her smile softened at that, touched by something unspoken. She looked away briefly, then back again, her eyes lingering with quiet intensity. "Be careful," she murmured. "You might just outmatch me." The air between them tightened again, a delicate string pulled taut. He felt the pull, the invisible thread drawing him closer to her world. The playfulness had become something else, something that blurred the edges of ordinary talk, something that carried both warmth and risk. He realized then that their exchange wasn't just playful. It was a dance, a careful balance between saying enough and saying too much, between laughter and longing. And though neither admitted it out loud, they both knew. The game they were playing was no longer just words. Charged silence. The laughter between them faded, leaving the room wrapped in quiet again. But this silence was not the same as before. It was heavier, sharper, filled with something that neither of them dared to name. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second sounding louder than it should. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing faintly in the distance, a bird calling once and then disappearing. But inside the room, time seemed to slow. He sat with his hands resting loosely in his lap, his body leaning forward slightly, as if he was caught halfway between speaking and staying still. She remained on the bed, her posture calm but her eyes restless, darting from him to the curtain and back again, as though searching for an answer she already knew. The silence pressed on them both. He felt it in his chest like a weight sitting over his heart, making his breathing shallow. She felt it too. He could see it in the way she twisted her fingers together, a small nervous habit he had never noticed before. It wasn't uncomfortable, not in the way of strangers who don't know what to say. It was different. It was the kind of silence that said too much, the kind that made words unnecessary but also dangerous if they were spoken. He cleared his throat softly, the sound breaking the stillness for a moment. "It's very quiet in here," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Sometimes quiet is where the truth hides. The answer struck him. He nodded slowly, unsure how to reply. She had a way of turning simple words into something that felt deeper, something that asked more of him than he was ready to give. The curtain moved again, brushing against the window frame with a faint whisper. The sunlight shifted across the floor, touching her hair with a glow that made her seem softer, almost untouchable. He found himself watching too closely, noticing things he had never allowed himself to notice before. The way her eyes lingered, the delicate curve of her hand resting against her knee, the softness of her breath in the still air. And then she looked at him, really looked, holding his gaze longer than she should have. The silence between them tightened, charged like a storm waiting to break. He swallowed, his throat dry. "You're staring," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was a protest or an invitation. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "So are you." The words were simple, but the way she said them made his chest tighten. Neither of them looked away. The silence grew louder, if silence could do that, filling the room with everything they weren't saying. He could hear his own heartbeat now, faint but steady, echoing in his ears like the softest drum. It was almost as though the room itself had taken on that rhythm, the ticking clock, the rise and fall of her breath, his pulse quickening as each second passed. The tension wrapped around them like invisible threads. He felt caught in them, bound by the unspoken closeness that hung in the air. It was both frightening and comforting at once. She shifted slightly on the bed, leaning just a little closer. The movement was small, almost casual, but it sent a ripple through him. He leaned forward without thinking, his body answering before his mind could stop it. The silence was no longer still. It was alive, full of questions and possibilities. Every second stretched longer, holding them in a moment that felt both endless and fragile. Her lips parted as though she might speak, but no words came. Instead, she let the quiet say it for her. He understood, though he couldn't have explained how. It was in the way her eyes softened, in the way her shoulders lowered, in the way the air between them seemed to grow thinner. Finally, he broke the stillness with a whisper. "This feels different." Her eyes held his, steady and knowing. "It is different." And then silence again, charged heavy but no longer frightening. It felt like standing at the edge of something they could not name, something that might carry them forward if they let it. He wanted to speak again, to ask her what this meant, to ask her why she had called him into her room in the first place, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he let the silence stretch, let it hold them together like a secret. The clock ticked. The curtain swayed. The room breathed with them. In that charged silence, he realized something clear. Sometimes words were not strong enough to hold a moment. Sometimes silence said everything, and in that silence, he knew they had already crossed another line without moving, without touching, without even naming it. Blurred boundaries. The silence lingered, but it was no longer the same. It had shifted into something heavier, something that felt like it belonged only to them. The room, once ordinary, now held a closeness that neither of them could ignore. He sat very still, his hands pressed against his knees, as if any movement might change everything. She was only a few steps away, sitting on the bed, her face calm but her eyes carrying a storm he could not read. The air between them felt thin, stretched tight. Every sound became sharper. The hum of the fan above, the faint rustle of her dress as she moved, the steady tick of the clock. Even his own breathing seemed too loud. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees, her hands folded together. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly, her voice low but steady. He hesitated, unsure if she meant what he thought she meant. "Feel what?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Her gaze didn't falter. "This," she whispered, letting the word hang in the air. His chest tightened. He nodded slowly, unable to lie. "Yes." The simple honesty seemed to shift something in the room. She sat back again, her eyes softening, her lips curving into a faint smile that carried both relief and danger. For years their connection had been safe, defined by family ties and familiar roles. But now those lines were blurring. She wasn't just his mother's best friend in this moment. She was something else, someone who saw him differently, and someone he was beginning to see differently too. He tried to steady himself by glancing around the room, but everywhere his eyes landed seemed to remind him of her. The framed photograph, the perfume bottle on her dresser, the cup of tea still steaming on the table. Each object felt like part of her world, and now he was inside it, invited closer than he should have been. She broke the quiet again, her tone softer this time. "I don't usually let people in here," she said. "Not like this." The confession made his pulse quicken. "Why me?" he asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes steady, unflinching. Then she gave a small shrug as though pretending it wasn't as serious as it felt. "Maybe because you listen. Maybe because you look at me and really see me." Her words echoed what she had hinted at earlier. He felt the weight of them, the truth they carried. He had never thought about it that way, but she was right. He did see her. Not just as his mother's friend, not just as someone familiar, but as herself, complex, warm, and now strangely fragile. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet. "I do see you." The moment that followed was too delicate to name. Her eyes softened and she let out a slow breath as though she had been holding it for too long. Boundaries blurred further. What had been playful earlier now felt dangerously close to confessional. He could feel the pull between them, the invisible thread tying him to her in a way that defied reason. She reached for her cup again, lifting it to her lips. But when she set it down, she let her hand linger on the table, her fingers brushing against the wood as though they were searching for something. Without thinking, he moved his own hand slightly forward, stopping just short of touching hers. The distance was small, but it felt like a choice, a step closer to something neither of them had spoken aloud. She noticed, of course. Her eyes flicked to his hand, then back to his face. A faint smile touched her lips, but there was no humor in it. Only quiet understanding. "You know what happens next," she whispered. The words struck him deeply. They were not a question. They were not even an invitation. They were a truth spoken in advance, one that left the rest to his imagination. His heart pounded. He wanted to speak, to ask her what she meant, but he already knew. The meaning lived in her tone, in her gaze, in the silence that pressed around them. And so he said nothing. He only breathed, steady but trembling, caught in the thin line between what was safe and what was already broken. She leaned back slowly, her shoulders relaxing as if she had said enough. "We don't have to talk about it," she said softly. "Sometimes silence says more." He nodded, his throat too tight to answer. The silence returned, but it was different now, soaked with longing, heavy with what they both knew but refused to name. He realized then that the moment they had entered was not one they could undo. The boundary had already blurred and no words could redraw it. The clock ticked on. The curtain swayed. And in that quiet room, the distance between them felt both impossibly wide and dangerously close. The unspoken. The air was still, thick with something that refused to be spoken. He sat frozen in his chair, every part of him aware of her breathing, her nearness, the steady calm of her voice that hid 1,000 unspoken things. She looked at him quietly, her eyes steady but soft, as though she was waiting for him to understand without being told. And he did. He understood far more than he could ever admit aloud. Words felt useless. Every sentence that came to his mind dissolved before reaching his lips. He realized then that speaking might break the spell, might shatter the fragile thread pulling them closer. So he said nothing, and she said nothing either. The silence was not empty, it was alive, humming with meaning. The clock ticked on the wall, but even that sound seemed distant now, as if the world outside the room had disappeared. Her hand moved faintly on the bed, brushing against the sheet. His eyes followed, though he tried not to. The small movement carried more weight than 1,000 words. She noticed his gaze and smiled faintly, a smile that knew everything and explained nothing. "You know," she whispered, her voice low and lingering. "Not every story is meant to be told." He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Then how do we know it happened?" Her eyes softened at his question. "Because we carry it," she said, "even if no one else ever hears it." Her words struck something deep in him, something he couldn't name. He nodded slowly because he understood. There were things too delicate to explain, things that only lived in the spaces between words. The room seemed smaller now, as if the walls had drawn closer, trapping the air between them. His heart beat faster, and though neither of them moved closer, the space between them felt thinner, almost breakable. She leaned slightly to the side, resting her chin in her hand, her eyes never leaving his. "You look like you want to ask something." "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice unsteady. "Then don't," she whispered gently. "Some things are stronger when they're left unsaid." The sentence lingered in the air like perfume, soft and lasting. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but he stayed still. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was the sense that whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be rushed. Her smile deepened, though it carried a touch of sadness now. "We didn't stop there," she said, her tone wrapped in double meaning. His chest tightened at the words. They didn't describe, they didn't explain, yet they carried everything. His imagination filled the rest, painting pictures that words could never safely hold, and maybe that was the point. The unspoken left room for the heart to understand in ways the mind could not. The breeze lifted the curtain again, filling the room with shifting light. The sun touched her face, making her glow as though she belonged to some dream. He blinked, half afraid the moment might vanish if he looked away. "You'll remember this," she said softly, almost to herself. "I already do," he replied. Her eyes glistened, and she let out the faintest sigh. "Good." The silence deepened again, but it was no longer heavy. It was tender, almost fragile, like glass that could break if handled too roughly. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Does it frighten you, this?" She shook her head slowly. "No. What frightens me is how natural it feels." Her answer sent a shiver through him. Natural. That was exactly what it was. Wrong and right at the same time. Forbidden and yet somehow inevitable. He wanted to speak again, but she lifted her hand gently as if to stop him. "Don't," she whispered. "Let silence hold it. Let silence keep it safe." And so he obeyed. The quiet stretched on, wrapping around them like a blanket. In that silence lived everything they could not say. The longing, the tenderness, the blurred lines between comfort and desire. He knew he would carry this moment with him, not for what was spoken, but for what wasn't, and she knew too. The way her eyes lingered on his, the way her breath caught faintly, the way she sat still as if afraid to break the fragile spell, all of it told the story better than words ever could. The unspoken became their language, a secret they shared without ever naming it. When he finally leaned back in his chair, letting the silence rest between them, he felt a strange peace. For the first time, he realized that not every truth needs to be said aloud to be real. Some truths live in the heart, in the spaces between words, in the moments of quiet that echo louder than sound. And this was one of them, bittersweet reflection. The day had shifted without them noticing. What began with golden morning light had turned into the softer glow of afternoon. The room was quieter now, as if the house itself had grown tired of holding its breath. He sat in the same chair, though his body had loosened, no longer tense as before. She remained on the bed, her posture calm but her eyes carrying that same mix of warmth and weight. Between them lay a silence that was no longer charged with question. It had settled into something gentler, something that felt almost like understanding. The clock ticked on the wall. The curtain swayed lazily in the breeze. Outside, a car passed, its sound faint and distant, reminding him that the world had kept moving even while they had been frozen in their own time. She lifted her cup again, though the tea had long gone cold. She didn't drink it. She only held it for a moment, then set it back down with care, as if the gesture itself mattered more than the drink. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, thoughtful. "It's strange," she said, "how a single day can feel like it changes everything." He nodded slowly. "It does feel that way." Her eyes lingered on him, steady and searching, as though she was measuring what he truly meant. Then she looked away, her gaze drifting toward the window. "And yet," she whispered, "tomorrow it will all look the same." Her words struck him. He followed her gaze, watching the curtain dance with the breeze. She was right. The room, the house, even the sunlight, it would all look ordinary again tomorrow. But they would not. He wanted to tell her that he would carry this day with him, that no matter how ordinary the world became, this moment would stay etched in his memory. But the words felt too heavy, too final, so he let them rest in his chest. She sighed softly, a sound almost too quiet to catch. "Memories are strange," she said. "They can feel louder than the present." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, though his heart ached. "This one will stay loud for me." Her lips curved into a faint smile, touched with sadness. Mine too. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was bittersweet, tender, filled with both gratitude and regret. They both knew the moment was slipping away, that the quiet closeness they had shared would soon become only a memory. He stood slowly, his chair creaking against the floor. She watched him, her eyes following his every movement. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to step closer or step back. She seemed to sense his struggle. "Go," she said softly, her voice calm, though her eyes betrayed her reluctance. "Some doors are meant to close gently, not loudly." He nodded, though the weight of her words pressed heavily against his chest. He moved toward the door, his footsteps quiet but steady. Each step felt final, each sound against the wooden floor reminding him that he was leaving something behind. At the doorway he paused and looked back. She was still sitting on the bed, her figure framed by the soft glow of the window light. Her expression was unreadable, part smile, part sorrow, part something deeper that words could never name. Their eyes met one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was for the invitation, for the silence, or for the memory itself. She gave a small nod, her voice barely audible. "Carry it with you." And then slowly he stepped out. The door clicked shut behind him, soft but final. The sound echoed in his ears, a reminder that the moment had passed. In the hallway the air felt different, lighter, emptier. He stood still for a moment, his hand brushing against the wall, his mind replaying the silence, the words, the glances that had filled the room. The house hummed quietly, as if nothing had happened. The clock ticked on, steady and indifferent, yet he knew that something inside him had shifted forever. He walked toward the kitchen, hearing the faint clink of dishes left behind from breakfast. He poured himself a small cup of water, the sound of liquid filling the glass breaking the quiet. He took a slow sip, letting the coolness ground him. But even as he tried to return to the ordinary, his mind drifted back. To the way she had looked at him. To the way silence had spoken louder than words. To the way the room had carried an intimacy too tender to name. It was not a story he could tell anyone. It was not something he could write down or explain. It was something meant to be carried quietly, tucked away inside him. A secret that would live between his heart and memory. He knew he would return to that house again, maybe even to that same room. But it would never be the same. The lines had blurred, the silence had spoken, and the memory had already taken root. And though the world outside would see nothing different, he would always know. It had been more than a visit. It had been a moment, a fleeting, fragile crossing of lives that would remain with him forever.